The warship Sovereign Fang did not feel like a place where children should exist. It felt like a place built to sharpen adults into weapons. The corridors were wide and dark, lined with black alloy ribs and banners taken from conquered raider houses. The air smelled faintly of machine oil, hot metal, and the musky territorial scent the Valrathi left behind when too many warriors crowded the same deck. Jonah Reed had been aboard for 19 days, and even now the flagship still felt less like a ship and more like the inside of some giant armored beast that had decided to fly through space. He stood near the outer wall of the Great Council chamber, holding a data slate and trying very hard to look like what he officially was, a temporary human rescue medic and systems specialist assigned to juvenile stress response and emergency medical support. In truth, everyone in the room saw him as something simpler, a tolerated outsider, useful when blood spilled, invisible when politics began. Jonah preferred it that way. Across the chamber, the clan leaders of the Valrathi Empire were gathering in layered ceremonial armor, their broad shoulders draped in dark war cloaks, their gold eyes catching the firelight from the suspended braziers overhead. They spoke in low growls and clipped formal phrases while attendants moved between them carrying oath tablets and scent-marked ribbons of legitimacy. Tonight was not just another war council. Tonight was the first witness right of the ruling line. By old pack law, before the heir reached his 7th season, he had to be publicly seen by the high clans during a full command assembly. The right was ancient, older than the empire itself, born from a time when rival bloodlines had settled succession with assassination and civil war. If the heir was not witnessed alive, named and protected before the pack elders, any claimant with enough force could later challenge the line. Jonah had heard Matron Surith explain it that morning in the same tone someone might use to explain gravity. "The child is not here by indulgence, human Reed," she had said, fixing him with her pale yellow stare. "He is here because law remembers what ambition does when succession is left vague." Jonah had nodded. "And because if he isn't seen tonight, somebody later will say he was weak, hidden, or false." Surith had regarded him for a long moment, then dipped her chin once. "You listen better than most warriors." He had almost smiled at that. Now the right was minutes away, and the child at the center of all that law and danger sat too straight on a carved stone seat beside the throne dais, wearing a formal black mantle he clearly hated. Heir Kale looked very young from across the chamber, smaller than the moment being built around him, his silver-gray fur brushed smooth, his ears pinned in rigid discipline that fooled nobody paying close attention. Jonah had met him twice in the medical wing after routine stress assessments, and once in a service corridor, where the boy had been staring at a maintenance drone, with the solemn attention of someone deciding whether it could be trusted. Kale had said little during those meetings, but Jonah knew the signs well enough. The child was exhausted, overstimulated, and doing his absolute best not to show it. His fingers kept flexing against the seat edge. His shoulders tightened each time another clan lord entered with guards and ceremonial weapons. His breathing went shallow whenever someone bowed to him too low or too long. A child, Jonah thought, being made to sit inside the center of a machine that only understood power. Alpha Varric Thane stood behind the boy now, vast and still, one hand resting near the back of Kale's seat without quite touching it. The Alpha looked like the sort of being frontier stations told stories about when they wanted children to obey safety locks. Scars ran beneath his throat fur and disappeared into his collar. His armor was dark blue, almost black, with no ornament beyond the ruling sigil burned into the chest plate. When he looked over the chamber, warriors lowered their eyes. When he looked at his son, the hard lines of his face softened by a degree most species would have missed. "Do not bare your teeth at Lord Dreve if he challenges the wording," he said quietly. Kale stared ahead. "What if he deserves it?" A few nearby attendants pretended not to hear. Varric's mouth twitched in the closest thing Jonah had seen him allow himself in public to amusement. "Then you may imagine it vividly and remain silent," Kale muttered. "Silence is difficult. Ruling is mostly difficult things done slowly," Varric said. Jonah looked down at his slate to hide the fact that he found that unexpectedly human. Unexpectedly fatherly, too. The chamber swelled with bodies and sound as the final clan leaders took their places. Metal boots rang against the floor. Deep voices rolled under the vaulted ceiling. Scent braziers released ceremonial smoke that made the air thicker and warmer. Jonah watched Kale's ears tilt back another fraction and knew the boy was getting close to the edge. Matron Surith stepped onto the lower dais and struck her staff once. The chamber settled. "Let all present witness," she began, "that Kale Thane, son of Varric Thane, blood of the living line, stands before Fang, oath, and command." A heavy side door opened late. Every head turned. Commander Drovic entered with 6 retainers and the kind of measured apology powerful men wore when they wanted everyone to notice they had been delayed by matters above ordinary importance. He bowed to the Alpha, but not deeply enough to be respectful and not shallowly enough to be challenged. Jonah saw the effect of him immediately. Kale's shoulders went rigid. His claws pressed into the stone seat. Surith's voice did not falter, but the room's balance changed. Jonah did not know Drovic well, yet he knew the type. Too smooth. Too interested in rules when rules could be weaponized. The commander's gaze flicked once to Kale, and the boy looked away so fast it felt like a flinch disguised as discipline. Jonah's skin prickled. He leaned toward the nearest attendant and murmured, "Has the heir had a break?" The attendant blinked, surprised that the human had spoken. "A break?" Jonah kept his voice low. "Food, quiet space away from all this." The attendant looked scandalized. "He is in right position." Jonah glanced back at Kale, at the tight jaw, the too still body, the bright, overwhelmed eyes. "Yeah," he said softly, "that's what I was afraid of." Then Surith called for the formal witness standing, and in the small ripple of movement that followed, Jonah looked toward the throne seat again and felt his stomach drop. Kale was no longer there. The silence after Jonah realized the seat was empty lasted less than a heartbeat, but inside that heartbeat the entire chamber changed shape. A moment earlier it had been ritual, posture, law, and carefully arranged dominance. Now it was danger, pure, immediate, and impossible to disguise. Matron Surith stopped mid-sentence. Alpha Varric Thane's hand snapped to the back of the carved seat and found nothing there. Several clan lords half rose at once, not out of concern but calculation, and Jonah saw that too. A missing child was one kind of crisis. A missing heir in the middle of a formal witness rite was another. That was succession panic. That was challenge, scandal, bloodline weakness, and possible civil fracture, all wrapped around a child too young to carry any of it. "Where is he?" Varric's voice did not rise, but the chamber reacted as if he had struck every wall at once. Guards moved instantly. Attendants backed away from the dais. Commander Drovic turned sharply, his expression arranged into alarm just a fraction too slowly for Jonah's liking. "Seal the chamber," Drovic barked. "No one leaves." "No," Jonah said before he could stop himself. The word cut across the room so strangely that several heads actually turned toward him in surprise. Varric's eyes found him at once. "Explain, human." Jonah stepped forward, data slate still in hand. Pulse kicking hard in his throat but mind clearing with the speed it always did when other people were panicking wrong. "If Kale left because he was frightened, sealing every exit and turning this into a hunt will push him farther into hiding. He's not an assassin. He's overloaded." A low growl rolled from one of the lesser clan chiefs. "You presume much." Jonah did not look at him. "I notice things. That's why your medical division kept me." Surith descended from the dais with controlled speed, staff clicking once against the black floor. "State your observations." Jonah pointed toward the empty seat. He was already at threshold before the rite started. Rapid breath, locked shoulders, auditory overload, repeated hand tension. Then Commander Drovic arrived late, everyone shifted posture, and the room got louder and tighter all at once. The heir didn't run because he's disobedient. He ran because this chamber stopped feeling survivable. Drovic's gaze hardened by 1 degree. "You dare suggest my arrival frightened the ruling heir?" Jonah met his stare for the first time. "I'm suggesting the kid was drowning before anyone noticed, and then the wave got bigger." Varric did not rebuke him. That mattered more than if he had agreed aloud. The Alpha turned to the chamber and said, "Lock the external hangars, the weapons decks, and all live fire sectors. Keep the main internal routes open." Several guards hesitated. That was not standard missing air protocol. It was not domination. It was search logic. Good, Jonah took the opening. He won't go somewhere grand. He'll go somewhere quieter than this. Smaller, mechanical maybe. Somewhere with only one or two exits. Surith's ears flicked once. "You speak as though you have done this before." Jonah gave a brief humorless breath. "Different species. Same nervous system story." What followed was not orderly despite everyone's effort to pretend otherwise. The warship Sovereign Fang went into silent lockdown. Doors sealed in the outer command sectors. Patrol nodes lit across the lower decks. Search teams split into pairs and trios so the corridors would not feel like military sweeps if Kale saw them coming. The clan lords remained inside the council chamber under formal watch, which only made the air there more poisonous. Jonah could feel suspicion breeding by the second. If the heir was not found quickly, somebody would say he was taken. If he was taken, somebody would say a rival clan allowed it. If that spread, old grievances would rise like knives from under a rug. On Jonah's second circuit through the upper service corridors, Terran, a young palace page assigned to ceremonial linens, nearly collided with him at a corner and then froze. "I'm sorry," the page blurted. "I was told to search the East Observatory." Jonah caught the kid gently by the forearm before he bolted again. "Did you see Kale before he vanished?" Terran swallowed. "Not vanish. Earlier. Before the right. He asked me where the quiet vents were." Jonah's mind snapped into place. What exactly did he say? He asked where the ship was least loud. Jonah closed his eyes for half a second. Of course. Not where could he hide. Where was the ship least loud? "And what did you tell him?" Terran looked miserable. "I thought he was joking. I said maintenance crescent on deck 9 because no nobles ever go there." Jonah was already moving. "You should have led with that." He keyed the local search net. Possible direction confirmed. Deck 9 maintenance crescent. Low traffic, reduced lighting, thermal ducts probably shielded from main ceremony noise. Varric's voice came back first. "I am en route," Jonah answered at once. "No, sir." A dangerous pause. "No, if he's there because he needed the ship to stop being too much, then a full royal escort arriving in armor will make him bolt again. Send one guard to hold the junctions. Let me go first." Another pause, longer this time. Jonah could imagine the Alpha weighing instinct against result. "Surith goes with you," Varric said at last. "And if my son is harmed—" "He's not," Jonah said, more firmly than rank should have allowed. "He's hiding, not hurt. There's a difference." The channel closed. Deck 9's maintenance crescent felt like another ship entirely. The ceilings were lower. The walls were bare alloy interrupted by service panels and humming conduit lines. The air smelled of coolant, warm circuits, and recycled heat instead of incense and fur and politics. Every few meters a status lamp glowed soft white instead of the harsh ceremonial gold from the upper decks. Jonah slowed as soon as he entered, forcing his own footsteps quieter. Surith matched him with surprising grace for someone wrapped in ritual iron and judgment. "If you are wrong," she murmured, "the chamber above us begins to rot." Jonah glanced at her. "Then let's be right quickly." They passed a half-open storage alcove, a maintenance ladder well, and a drone charging bay. Then Jonah heard it, not crying, not movement exactly. A small, rhythmic scraping sound from farther down the crescent near the thermal inspection crawlspace. He lifted one hand to stop Surith. "Stay here. You presume much, human read." "Yeah," Jonah whispered. "But right now I'm presuming quieter than armor." He stepped forward alone, rounded the bend slowly, and saw a small black ceremonial mantle crumpled on the floor outside an open service hatch. Jonah's chest tightened. He crouched beside it, reached toward the dim opening beyond, and spoke in the calmest voice he had. "Kale," he said softly, "it's Jonah. I think you stole a whole warship's worth of attention." From somewhere inside the hatch came a very small, very tired voice. "I didn't steal it, they threw it at me." Jonah kept his voice low and stayed exactly where he was, crouched beside the open service hatch with one hand resting on the cold deck plating and the other deliberately empty where Cale could see it. The maintenance crescent hummed softly around them, all warm ducts and steady machine noise, the sort of sound that did not demand anything from anyone. Good, that was probably why the boy had chosen it. Thrown at you, Jonah repeated gently. Yeah, that sounds more accurate. Inside the hatch, two pale gold eyes caught the low light and disappeared again. Are you going to make me come out? Cale asked. The question carried more exhaustion than defiance. Jonah looked back once toward Surith, who stood where he had left her, rigid as carved stone and wise enough, for once, to stay silent. Then he returned his attention to the hatch. No, he said. I'm going to sit here and talk to you until you decide what you want to do. A pause followed. That's not very official. Jonah eased himself down onto the deck outside the hatch and stretched his legs out in front of him. Good, because official is what sent you into a ventilation crawlspace. That almost earned him a sound that might have been a laugh if Cale had not been too tired to finish the motion. Matron Surith says a future alpha does not hide. Matron Surith has probably never had 12 clan lords stare at her like she was a border treaty with legs. Cale was quiet for a moment. Then he said with the careful honesty of the very young, they weren't looking at me like a person. Jonah nodded even though the child could only see part of him. No, they were looking at what you mean. That's a heavy thing to wear when you're 6. I am nearly 7. My mistake, ancient and battle-hardened. This time the small laugh did come, quick and tired and surprising both of them. Jonah heard Surith make the faintest disapproving click in the corridor behind him, but she did not interrupt. Good again. Cale shifted inside the shaft. Jonah could hear cloth against metal, the small restless scrape of claws against the maintenance grid. If I stood there wrong, Cale said softly, Lord Dreve would challenge wording. If I looked afraid, Commander Vorak would remember it. If I answered too fast, Matron Surith would correct me. If I answered too slowly, Father would know I was frightened in front of all of them. And then Drovik came in. There it was. Jonah kept his tone easy. You don't like Drovik. Silence. Then, very quietly, he smiles with no warmth in his scent. Jonah filed the phrase away. Kids notice things adults dressed up in politics. What happened when he came in? Cale did not answer right away. When he did, his voice had gone flatter, smaller, as if he were replaying something that did not fit inside him properly. He leaned near Matron Surith before the rite started. He thought I could not hear because everyone else was making noise. He said, once the witness is complete, the line is harder to move. Jonah's shoulders went still. Behind him, Surith made a sharp intake of breath she clearly had not intended anyone to notice. Did he say anything else? Jonah asked. Not all of it. I heard timing and claimants, and if the child falters in public. Then Father turned and Drovik stopped talking. Cale shifted again. I did not know what it meant, I still don't. But I knew I was suddenly colder. Jonah let the quiet sit for a second. Then he said, that was a very good reason to trust your instincts. Everyone else says heirs should ignore fear. Jonah looked at the service hatch, at the dim shape just beyond it, and answered with complete seriousness. That is stupid advice. Fear is useful. Panic is the problem. You didn't panic. You got out of a room that felt wrong. Cale thought about that. Matron Surith will hate that answer. She hates most answers that aren't carved into stone. Again the almost laugh. More importantly, Jonah heard the shift in Cale's breathing. Slower now. Less brittle. They sat like that for another minute, the warship humming around them while search teams moved somewhere far above, trying not to turn worry into disaster. Jonah did not crowd the hatch. He did not ask for promises. He simply stayed. Finally Cale spoke again. Are they angry? Jonah answered honestly. Yes. The boy went still. Jonah added, but not at you. Father will be. Your father is terrified. He is Alpha Varric Thane. And also your father, Jonah said. Those things can happen at the same time. Another long silence followed. Jonah could practically hear the child thinking through that, testing it against everything he had been taught about strength and display. and what pack leaders were permitted to feel in front of others. When Kale finally emerged, he did it with none of the dramatic dignity the chamber above would have preferred. He crawled out of the service hatch on hands and knees in wrinkled ceremonial black, fur dusty with vent grime, ears drooping with exhaustion, and one of the gold fasteners from his mantle missing entirely. Jonah took in the sight and against all better judgment said, "You look like you lost a fight with a laundry cart." Kale blinked at him, offended for exactly half a second, then slumped down beside the wall with all the fragile self-control of a child who had spent too many hours being watched and judged and could no longer hold himself upright under the effort. "I am not going back yet," he muttered. "Okay, you are supposed to argue. No, I'm supposed to keep you from bolting into another vent shaft." Kale stared at Jonah as if this were a novel leadership style. Then his gaze dropped to Jonah's boots. Heavy black shipboard boots, scuffed at the toes, planted squarely on the deck like they had nowhere else to be. Jonah saw the moment the child's body made the choice before his mind did. Kale shifted closer just a little at first, then a little more until his shoulder touched Jonah's shin. He seemed to realize what he was doing and hesitated, ears twitching with embarrassment. Jonah did not move, did not speak, did not make the moment bigger than it was. After another second, Kale gave up pretending he wasn't tired, curled against the side of Jonah's leg, rested one hand lightly across the toe of Jonah's boot as if checking that it was real, and fell asleep so fast it felt less like sleep and more like collapse. Jonah sat absolutely still. He could hear Surith approaching now in measured silence, could feel the whole warship's panic still coiled somewhere beyond this quiet little crescent, but he did not look up until she stopped beside him and saw the sleeping Heir for herself. Her expression changed so subtly most people would have missed it. Shock first, then relief so deep it almost looked like pain. Jonah kept his voice barely above a whisper. "Told you he needed quieter than armor." Surith stared down at Kale, curled up in a patch of warm deck light beside a human's boots, one small hand still gripping the leather as if he had finally found the only steady thing on the whole ship. When she answered, her voice had lost all its ceremonial iron. "Do not move," she said. "I am going to bring his father." Surith returned faster than Jonah expected, and she did not come alone. The maintenance crescent, which had felt like the quiet edge of the universe a minute earlier, suddenly held the controlled gravity of people powerful enough to move panic without shouting. Alpha Varric Thane came first, still in full council armor, his strides heavy and silent despite the plating. Behind him came two elite guards who stopped the instant they saw Surith's raised hand. Terrell was with them too, breath uneven from the sprint, one bandaged wing tucked tight against his side. No one spoke at first. They all saw the same thing. The missing heir of the ruling line, who had brought the flagship to silent lockdown and left half the War Council imagining assassination, was asleep on the floor in a warm patch of maintenance light with one hand curled around the edge of Jonah Reed's boot. Jonah had seen battlefield triage rooms go still before. He had seen rescue corridors hold their breath while someone decided whether a child would live or die. This silence felt stranger, more intimate. It was the silence of hard people being forced to witness a truth they had somehow missed in public view. Varric's face did not change at once, but something in the set of his shoulders did. A fraction of tension left him so suddenly that Jonah realized the Alpha had been holding his entire body like a weapon, for however long it had taken to search the ship. Surith stepped carefully to one side and lowered her voice to almost nothing. "He is unharmed." Varric did not take his eyes off Kale. "I can see that." Terrell, who had likely expected blood, sabotage, or at least tears, stared at Jonah as if the human had somehow performed sorcery through inaction. Jonah lifted one hand in the smallest possible warning. "Please do not make this dramatic," he whispered. "He crashed hard. If he wakes to armor, voices, and 12 people trying to claim him at once, he'll run again." One of the guards looked offended by the instruction. Varric silenced him with the smallest motion of 2 fingers. The Alpha then did something no one in the maintenance crescent had expected. He lowered himself slowly to one knee several paces away from his son, not crowding him, not reaching for him, simply making himself less immense. Jonah noticed Surith notice it too. "How long has he been asleep?" Varric asked. "Less than 5 minutes," Jonah answered quietly. He held himself together through the whole right lead-up, through the council atmosphere, through whatever Drovik said near the dais, and through however long he was hiding in the service shaft. Once he felt safe, the system shut down. Terrell's gaze sharpened. "Drovik?" Varric looked up sharply. Jonah nodded once. Kale heard something, not enough to fully understand it. Enough to know the room got colder when Commander Drovik arrived. Surith's grip tightened around her staff, but she kept her voice measured. "That can wait until the child wakes." "No," Varric said. "It can wait until the child is stable." That was a different sentence entirely, and Jonah filed it away with the others. More people began to collect at the far mouth of the maintenance crescent after that, drawn by the search net updates and the simple gravitational pull of the air being found. Jonah could hear them before he saw them, boots slowing, voices dropping, questions dying in throats. A pair of young attendants peered around the corner and then quickly looked down when they saw Kale asleep beside a human's boots, like a pup who had finally found the one place on the ship that did not want anything from him. Jonah would have laughed at the absurdity if he had been free to move his ribs. He remained very still instead. Kale had shifted after falling asleep. One ear flattened against Jonah's shin, his breathing deep and even now, one small hand still gripping the leather at Jonah's ankle, as if somewhere in sleep he remained unconvinced the quiet would stay unless he physically held on to it. "He chose you," Surith said at last. The words sounded more like an accusation than praise, but there was honest bewilderment beneath them. Jonah kept his eyes on the child. "No," he said softly. "He chose the first place on this ship that wasn't trying to turn him into a symbol." Terrell gave a short breath through his teeth. "Careful human." Jonah looked up at him just long enough to answer. "I am being careful. If I weren't, I'd say half your court noticed the right and none of you noticed the kid." That should have earned him at least a warning and maybe a formal reprimand, but no one in the Crescent had the energy to pretend he was wrong. Varric was still watching Kale, his expression stripped down to something much simpler than command. "Father," Jonah thought, "just father now." "Why you?" Varric asked quietly. It was not a hostile question. If anything, it sounded like the one thing he truly did not understand. Jonah answered honestly, because there was no useful lie here. "I didn't push him. I didn't bow. I didn't ask him to be impressive. I listened." The Alpha's eyes lifted to Jonah's face for the first time since arriving. "That is all. When someone's drowning in noise, all can be a lot." That seemed to land somewhere deep. Varric looked away first, which in that room might as well have been an admission. Kale woke the way frightened children often did after collapsing from exhaustion. Not with a jolt, but with a slow return to the world, the body surfacing before the mind agreed to follow. His fingers tightened once around Jonah's boot, then relaxed. One ear flicked. His eyes opened a slit, unfocused at first, then widened as he realized the maintenance crescent was no longer just him and Jonah and the warm hum of the ship. There were shadows now, armor, witnesses. Jonah felt the moment panic threatened and spoke before it could fully rise. "Easy," he said quietly. "Nobody rushed you. See." Kale's gaze jumped from Jonah to Surith to Terrell, and finally to Varric kneeling a careful distance away. His ears flattened. "I left," he said hoarsely, shame arriving before memory fully had. "Yes," Varric said. His voice was rougher than before. "You did." Kale looked down, bracing for the strike of anger that never came. After a moment he said in a smaller voice, "I know the right matters. It does. And I made it weak." That was when Jonah saw something pass through Varric's face that no council lord above would ever be permitted to witness. Pain. Clean and immediate. "No," the Alpha said. "You made it honest." Kale blinked, confused enough to look up. Varric exhaled slowly through his nose. "And that failure is mine before it is yours." Surith looked as though someone had just rewritten one of her sacred tablets in front of her, but she did not interrupt. Kale's hand loosened from Jonah's boot at last, though he did not move away. Instead he leaned against Jonah's leg, still half curled there, and asked the question that had probably mattered to him more than law or shame or politics. "Am I in trouble?" Jonah answered before anyone else could make it ceremonial. "You're in maintenance dust and missing half your formal dignity, but no, I don't think trouble made the final list." Cale huffed a small, tired laugh. Then he pointed, not at his father, not at Surith, not at the guards, but at Jonah. He was quiet, he said, and because he was still only a child, that was apparently explanation enough for the entire ruling line of a war empire. Strangely, it was enough for Jonah too. The crescent fell silent again, but this time it was not panic. It was recognition. And somewhere far above them, in the council chamber where succession and law had nearly swallowed a child whole, Commander Drovik was still waiting. Cale did not want to return to the council chamber, which Jonah thought was probably the healthiest instinct anyone had displayed all night. Unfortunately, the warship Sovereign Fang was still carrying an active right, a room full of armed clan leaders, and a commander named Drovik who had become much more interesting in exactly the wrong way. So the maintenance crescent could not remain a sanctuary forever. Varric rose first, slower than Jonah expected for someone built like a siege engine, and crouched just enough to meet his son's eyes without towering over him again. "Cale," he said quietly, "I need you to tell me what you heard." The boy's ears shifted back. "Now, yes, in front of everyone." Varric's gaze flicked once to the gathering of guards and attendants at the corridor mouth. "Not everyone." He turned his head. "Clear the crescent, Surith, Terrell, the human, and no one else." There was a brief ripple of surprise at Jonah still being included, but no one dared argue. Within seconds the corridor emptied, leaving only the low hum of ductwork, the four of them, and the child still half-curled beside Jonah's leg. Cale looked from one face to the next and then down at the deck. "Commander Drovik spoke to one of his officers before the rite started," he said at last. "He thought I was listening to Matron Surith. I was, but I was also listening to him." Surith's expression tightened by degrees. "What words did you hear exactly?" Cale frowned in concentration. "Not all of them." He said, "Once the witness is complete, the line becomes harder to move." Then the other one asked, "And if the child falters before that," Drovik said, "then the chamber will see weakness in its own light." Terrell swore under his breath. Varric said nothing. That silence was worse. Cale continued, trying to be precise in the way frightened children do when they know adults need exact things from them. "Then I heard claimants and timing, and the mother clans will turn if fear is seen openly. I did not understand all of it, but I understood they were waiting for something bad to happen to me while everyone watched." Jonah felt the logic settle in his mind all at once. Not assassination, not kidnapping, something cleaner and crueler: public collapse. Public failure. Make the air break during the first witness rite and the memory would stain him before law ever had the chance to protect him. He wanted Cale to panic in front of the chamber, Jonah said quietly. Surith's eyes flashed. So the old bloodlines could claim the ruling line had gone soft. Terrell's jaw tightened. And Drovik could stand back as if he were merely one more concerned commander watching an unfit child disgrace himself. Varric finally moved. He did not roar, he did not bare his teeth. He simply straightened, and when he spoke the words came out cold enough to frost metal. "He used my son as a succession lever." Cale looked up quickly. "I left before he could." Varric's expression shifted just for a second: pride, pain, fury. "Yes," he said, "you did." Jonah should have stayed quiet after that. Human medics and system specialists were not supposed to insert themselves into the succession law of apex predator empires. But he had spent enough years around panicked kids and ugly adults to know when everyone in a room was about to make a tactical mistake, because their blood was louder than their planning. "If you storm back in and accuse Drovik outright, you play into his hand," he said. Terrell turned on him first. "Explain." Jonah rose carefully so Cale would not think he was being abandoned, then leaned back against the wall and looked at Varric. "Right now Drovik knows only one thing for certain. The air vanished in the middle of the rite. If Cale walks back in shaken and you come in furious, Drovik gets what he wanted anyway. The chamber smells weakness, confusion, and a father acting from panic. Best case, he loses. Worst case, he loses and leaves the idea behind. Surith's grip tightened on her staff. You are suggesting we pretend none of this happened. No, Jonah said. I'm suggesting you let him think he nearly got away with it until he steps forward far enough to hang himself with his own confidence. Varric's eyes settled on him. How? Jonah looked down at Kale, who was now fully awake and listening hard. By finishing the rite. Terrell stared at him as if he had suggested lighting the ship on fire to improve ventilation. Surith spoke first. The rite has already been broken. No, Jonah said. Interrupted. Those aren't the same. You still have the air. You still have the chamber. And unless your law says a 6-year-old is forbidden from needing air, Drovik can't openly challenge a pause without sounding like the exact predator he is. Surith did not answer immediately. Jonah could practically see her rifling through generations of precedent in her head. Finally she said grudgingly, no law forbids interruption by distress or biological necessity. Jonah nodded. Good, then use that. Bring Kale back in calm, not dragged. Don't make him look like prey recovered from hiding. Make him look like the heir who stepped out because the chamber was not worthy of his attention yet. Terrell's mouth opened slightly. That is manipulative, Jonah shrugged. So is politics. Humans just admit it more often. To Jonah's mild surprise, Kale was the one who spoke next. I could do that. All three adults turned toward him. The boy pushed himself upright, rubbed one eye with the back of his hand, and looked suddenly very much like the child he was and the future ruler he might become at the same time. If I go back, he said, Drovik will watch my face. Varric crouched again. Yes, Kale's ears tilted thoughtfully. Then I want to watch his. Jonah felt something like admiration curl through him, not because the kid sounded brave, because he sounded tired and still willing. That was much rarer. You don't have to prove anything tonight, Jonah said. Kale glanced at him. If I don't, then he still gets to decide what fear means. That was too sharp a sentence to belong to someone so young, which meant the court had been pressing him with claws long before tonight. Varric exhaled once, slow and controlled. If we do this, he said, looking from Kale to Surith to Jonah, we do it precisely. Surith, you will resume the right from interruption clause. Terrell, you will place watchers on Drovik's retainers and nobody else will know why. Human Reed, Jonah grimaced inwardly at the title, which always meant more trouble than his contract had advertised. You brought my son back from the edge of a collapse without command, rank, or law to support you. Stay near the lower dais. If he needs the room to quiet again, you will be there before anyone else notices. Jonah blinked. That is an aggressively strange assignment for a human systems medic. Varric's mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile and not quite a threat. Then consider it an aggressively strange honor. Kale stood then, brushing maintenance dust from his formal mantle, while Surith refastened the missing clasp with fingers far gentler than Jonah would have guessed she possessed. When the boy was ready, he looked at Jonah once, briefly, almost shyly, and said, Do not leave the dais. Jonah nodded. Not planning to. Then the heir of the ruling line, the matron of law, the alpha of the warship, and one human who had somehow become part of the plan turned toward the council chamber together. And somewhere ahead of them Commander Drovik was still standing in the bright light, thinking the game was his. When they re-entered the great council chamber, the room felt different in a way Jonah Reed had learned to respect. It still held the same armored clan lords, the same banners, the same braziers breathing ceremonial scent into the air, but the shape of the tension had changed. Before, it had been ritual pressure, sharp and formal. Now it was watchfulness. Every eye in the chamber went first to Alpha Varric Thane, then to the small figure walking beside him, and finally to the human standing half a pace behind the lower dais, as if he had somehow been folded into a sacred proceeding by sheer accident and stubborn timing. Kale wore the same dark mantle, though a little dust still clung to the hem where Surith had not fully brushed away the maintenance crescent. Good, Jonah thought. Let them see that the air was real enough to get dirty. Matron Surith stepped back onto the dais and struck her staff once. The first witness right resumes under interruption clause, she said. Her voice was iron again, but not the blind iron from before. This time it had purpose in it. The heir stands present, unharmed and uncoerced. Let any who question legitimacy now do so before oath and command. The chamber went very still. That was the legal invitation Drovik had been waiting for, but not in the shape he had expected. Jonah saw the commander at once across the third tier, posture perfect, face composed, yet something in him had tightened. He had anticipated panic, shame, confusion, perhaps a shaken child dragged back under guard. Instead, he had been given an heir who walked upright and an alpha who looked calmer than he had any right to look. Drovik stepped forward anyway because men like him never stopped once they believed the floor was finally theirs. Then I questioned the strength of the interruption, he said, voice pitched to carry but not bark. A ruling line that cannot hold its own air steady through first witness invites concern from every mother clan sworn to the stability of this warship. A ripple moved through the chamber. Not agreement exactly, recognition. Drovik was saying aloud the thing ambition always wanted permission to say. Varric did not answer him. Surith did not answer him. To Jonah's surprise, Kale did. The boy took one measured step forward, small in the vastness of the chamber and somehow impossible to ignore. "Commander Drovik," he said. His voice was not loud, but it was clear. "Did you mean concern when you told your officer? Once the witness is complete, the line becomes harder to move." The silence that followed felt like a physical force. Drovik's expression did not collapse. Men like him practiced too much for that. But one of his ears twitched back before he caught it, and Jonah knew that was enough. "You are a child," Drovik said, too quickly. "You misheard tension and adult speech." Kale did not look at his father. He looked only at Drovik. "Then perhaps I also misheard. If the child falters before that, and the chamber will see weakness in its own light." Now the chamber truly moved. Heads turned. Scent shifted. Two clan mothers on the western tier leaned toward each other with the unmistakable sharpness of predators scenting blood in a story that had just become useful. Drovik spread his hand slightly. The air vanished in the middle of a sacred rite. "If my officers and I discuss the possible instability of such an event, that is caution, not conspiracy." "Interesting word," Terrell said from the lower command rail. He had not taken a ceremonial place. He stood in armor, bandaged wing close to his side, looking exactly like what he was. A soldier who had spent the last hour being useful while clever men prepared excuses. He raised one hand and two internal guards stepped from the side arch with a kneeling officer between them. Drovik's officer. The one Kale had heard him speaking to before the rite. The chamber sharpened all at once. Terrell's voice remained flat. This officer attempted to transmit a sealed challenge petition to 3 mother clans while the heir was missing. It was timestamped before interruption clause was even invoked. Surith extended her hand. One of the guards passed her the slate. She looked once, then once more, and when she lifted her head there was nothing ceremonial left in her expression. "The petition was drafted 6 hours before assembly," she said. "It cites anticipated public instability during witness and recommends temporary succession review under emergency confidence law." A clan lord on the upper tier let out a soft, ugly laugh. "Anticipated," another murmured. He came prepared to call weakness before weakness existed. Drovik's eyes flashed toward his officer so quickly it might have been a strike if not for the distance. "Overzealous subordinates do not become treason because they are clumsy," he said. But now he sounded like a man following his own collapse in real time, hearing the floor break one plank later than everyone else. Varric descended from the throne dais then, and all the chamber's noise died on instinct. He did not go to Drovik first. He went to his son. That, Jonah understood, was the true execution. The Alpha stopped beside Kale and said not loudly, "The rite asks the heir one question before witness is sealed. You know it." Kale's ears tilted once. He did. Surith straightened and spoke the old law into the room. "What is the first duty of the Alpha?" The chamber waited. Jonah felt his own heartbeat once in his throat. A night ago, maybe even an hour ago, Kale would have answered with something polished and inherited. "Protect the line. Hold the pack." Command the Fang. All true, all incomplete. The child who answered now had dust on his hem and sleep still softening one side of his face, and yet he stood steadier than half the adults in the room. The first duty of the Alpha, Kale said carefully, is to know the difference between fear and weakness. A murmur went through the tiers. Kale continued before anyone could turn the words into something smaller. Fear tells you where harm is. Weakness is when you use someone else's fear to move them where you want. He looked directly at Drovek. A ruler who needs that is not strong enough to lead. No one spoke after that because there was nothing left for speech to improve. Surith struck her staff once against the dais. Witness sealed, she declared. Heir confirmed. Challenge against the ruling line denied and reversed. Commander Drovek, you stand under immediate internal review for premeditated succession manipulation during sacred assembly. The guards moved before Drovek could summon dignity enough to wear it. He did not resist. That would have made him look brave. He let them take him with all the cold silence of a man who understood that the room had stopped belonging to him the moment the child he thought would break had come back awake. As he was led away, his gaze cut once toward Jonah, not with rage, but with the stunned hatred reserved for outsiders who ruin careful plans simply by being human in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jonah met the look without interest. He had seen that expression before in hospitals, stations, and refugee camps. It was the face of someone who mistook calm for insignificance until it was too late. The chamber did not explode into celebration after that. Valrathi were too disciplined and too suspicious for anything so simple, but the air changed. The pressure eased. Clan leaders straightened without circling. Mother clans lowered their challenge scent. The ship itself seemed to exhale. Varric placed one hand at last on Kale's shoulder and kept it there in full view of the chamber, not as control, as recognition. Then, to Jonah's complete lack of preparation, the Alpha turned his head and said, "Human Reed, step forward." There was no honorable way to refuse that. Jonah came to the dais, acutely aware of half the chamber cataloging his species, his posture, the scuffed boots currently carrying an absurd amount of symbolic weight. Varric studied him for a long moment. "My son chose your quiet over my warship," he said. "That is an indictment of us and a credit to you." Jonah opened his mouth, then closed it again because no available answer seemed safe. Kale solved the problem by reaching out and catching 2 fingers of Jonah's hand in his own. It was not a grand gesture. It was a sleepy child's practical decision not to lose the one person in the room who did not feel like ceremony. A few warriors in the chamber looked genuinely shocked by that. Varric did not. "From this day," the Alpha said, his voice carrying cleanly through the hall, "Jonah Reed of Earth will have free passage to all inner decks of Sovereign Fang by my word. He is under pack protection while aboard this vessel." That caused more reaction than Drovek's arrest had. Inner deck protection was not given lightly. Jonah managed. "That seems excessive for a systems medic." One corner of Varric's mouth moved. "You say that now." Kale finally looked up at Jonah and said the thing that made the whole ridiculous, terrifying night worthwhile. "You did not leave the dais," he reminded him. Jonah squeezed the small hand gently. "Told you I wouldn't." And for the first time since the rite began, the heir of the ruling line smiled without fear in it.